Good morning and welcome to episode 71 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined, as I am every Friday going forward, by Hacker, aka Ryan Green. He hosts Hacker After Dark each weekday evening from 8 to 10 p.m. Hacker, welcome back to the show. Appreciate you coming back.
I'm on the Baselli episode, man. Episode 71. I like that.
Right. It's going to be a Hall of Fame episode for sure. We're going to talk about some draft prospects that we like, some that we maybe don't like, kind of continuing to preview the NFL draft at large, but especially previewing next week's NFL Combine. We're also going to talk a little bit about take that you had via Awaken 180. But before we get to all of that, I figured we should at least mention the general manager search, since even though I personally don't have any new information, it seems like there are rumors coming out. James Gladstone from the Rams is the last interviewee, and he'll be interviewing with the Jaguars today. And so it seemed like there was a lot of Ian Cunningham smoke for a long time, and then all of a sudden there's a lot of Gladstone smoke coming out. And so, Hacker, what's your read on all of the latest apparent news? And then I know you ran a poll last night too, so if you want to share the results of that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the 11:45 p.m. Jaguar statement that they're going to hire a GM right before midnight tonight. I'm sure that's what's going to happen. We would love for you to do it prior to 8 o'clock, Jaguars, if you are listening. That would be terrific to break that on Hacker After Dark this evening. James Gladstone interviewing last. I'm trying to read the tea leaves. They're flying him in from L.A. They're not going to send him back to L.A. just to fly him back here to Jacksonville. So they're probably going to tell him to stick around, and he's going to know one way or the other probably by tonight or tomorrow. Interesting that he's the last interview. Again, I don't know what, if anything, to read into that, but that is odd to me. I ran a poll because everybody was on the Ian Cunningham train for the last couple of days. And I just said very simply, who do you want to be the next Jaguar GM? Ian Cunningham or James Gladstone? And 1,500 people or so responded, thanks to my guy Dilla for retweeting that. And 1,500 people responded. Gus, 76% of those 1,500 said James Gladstone. 76%. I mean, 1,500, that's a pretty decent number for a poll like that. So obviously the Jaguar fan base likes what they see out of the director of scouting out there for the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, they definitely kind of flipped on their head. Recency bias is a pretty strong drug, I think. But we'll see what happens. Do you want to give a final guess? Like, what do you think is going to happen? Because I assume the news will come out late tonight, possibly early tomorrow morning. So we'll be back on Duval Rundown on Monday to talk about the final decision. But just to wrap up, what's your final guesstimate for who will be the GM?
I've been on the James Gladstone train for the last couple of weeks. I think I'm 55-45 Gladstone over Cunningham. It would not surprise me if it's Ian Cunningham. I think those are the two. The one thing I will say, though, you've followed this team long enough. I certainly have as well. It would be very Jaguar-esque to hire Ethan Waugh, right? Now, I'm not saying Ethan Waugh would be a bad hire, but all the excitement in the fan base about Gladstone, there would be some excitement about Cunningham. For them to come out and say Ethan Waugh is the new general manager, again, maybe not a bad hire, but that would be kind of an air out of the balloon moment for a lot of people. And we'll see if the Jaguars Jaguar, because that seems like a move they have made in the past. We'll see if they differentiate from the norm here in the next 24 hours.
Yeah, we shall see, indeed. It does seem like the arrow is pointing to Gladstone currently, but I don't know. The Jaguars could Jaguar, as you said. But to move on, before we talk about some 2025 draft prospects, let's talk about the roster a little bit, because you made a good point earlier this week about how there's a youth movement in Jacksonville, not just in the coaching staff, but also on the roster. Trevor Lawrence, I think you said, is the 10th youngest quarterback in the league right now. It's just still 25 years old. Brian Thomas was 3 of only about a dozen or so receivers last year, or the 3rd youngest, I believe it was, to go over 1,000 yards last year. Trayvon Walker, obviously, is pretty young and still producing. Josh Hines-Allen is only 27 years old. Devin Lloyd, I'll throw in there. I think we at large need to talk about Devin Lloyd a little bit more because he deserves it based on his play on the field. And so there's a lot of young guys in Jacksonville on the roster. And so my question for you is, like, there's a lot of people in and outside of the city that think that Jaguars should have added some more experience to their coaching staff to kind of balance out their youth movement. And so when you're looking at the Jaguars roster, do you also think that they need to continue adding experienced players, kind of like they did last offseason when they got Ronald Darby and Mitch Morse and Arik Armstead to kind of balance out that youth movement, or should they kind of continue to try to draft and develop and go all in with that movement?
Whether they're 22 or 34, bringing the best players, the veterans they brought in last year weren't very good. I mean, it was a bad free agent haul with the veteran leadership that they brought in. And you mentioned the numbers. I did think it was interesting because like you said, the youth movement on the coaching staff. Liam Cohen's 39. Obviously, Grant Udinski is 29, which is still just odd to me. Even Campanile is only 42, I believe. Trevor Lawrence is still among the top 10 youngest starting quarterbacks in the league, or will be in 2025. 24 receivers, tight end combo, 24 guys had 1,000 or more receiving yards last season. Brian Thomas Jr. was third youngest among that list, just older by months than Brock Bowers and Malik Neighbors. And then Trayvon Walker was one of 17 players to have double-digit sacks in 2024. Trayvon was the second youngest among those 17, older than only Will Anderson of the Texans. So there's still a lot of cause for optimism. There is still a foundation here. But I mentioned this, Gus, last night. I keep hearing people talk about this as more of a retooling than a rebuild. I don't completely disagree with that, but this team has lost 18 of their last 23 games. All right, the last time I checked, when you've lost 18 of the last 23, I'm not sure how much retooling you need to do. I think you need to really take a good hard look in the mirror about why you've lost 18 games in your last 23 appearances. So I think it might even be closer to a rebuild than a retooling moving forward.
Well, the best way to rebuild is to go to the draft. That's what we'll do now. Hacker, what are some names or even just some positions in general that you're looking forward to kind of watching, not just at the combine next week, but looking forward to watching throughout the process and really, and interested in seeing how they play out as a pro too?
The big uglies, the O
Yeah,
line and the D line, the 300 pounders. I want to see what they do, particularly the interior offensive line, interior defensive line. I think safety is certainly something you need to look at as well. I mean, that was kind of my point, Gus, is that you look at this roster outside of quarterback. You feel pretty good about the edge rush position, I suppose. Oh, you need some depth there, but you feel pretty good about the two starters.
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, running back, I guess you feel good, right? With ETN and Bigsby, I suppose that's okay.
probably the
But
same deal there. You just need depth there.
right, tight end, kind of the same thing because you might lose Luke Farrell. But I mean, interior O line, interior D line, linebacker, corner, safety, wide receiver. I mean, you need to add some talent to these positions. So there's a lot of positions to look at. But I think first and foremost, the Jaguars were horrible running the ball and were really bad in stopping the run. And the last time I checked, those are two pretty important things to do. So I'm going to be looking at the big uglies at the combine to see who can come in here and help the Jaguars on both lines of scrimmage.
Yeah, that makes sense. One guy that I actually named yesterday on the show with Mia O'Brien as we truly preview the NFL Combine. So go back and listen to episode 70 for more pre-combine content. But the name that I threw out there was Missouri tackle Armand Membu, who's just a very smooth mover, someone that I expect to continue to rise throughout the draft process, especially after next week in Indianapolis. And I think he's probably unlikely to be a Jaguar, but I do think he's a good sleeper pick kind of for the 5th overall selection because I assume he's going to be taken at some point in the middle, potentially early middle of the first round in April. Another guy that I had written down was Savion Williams from TCU. I talked about his teammate Jack Beck before. They're both pretty great after the catch, but kind of in different ways. Williams has actually gotten a lot of Cordero Patterson comparisons because he lined up in the backfield a lot and was kind of used as a gadget receiver and gadget player a lot of the times, and he did well in that role. And he's also typically gadget receivers are like smaller guys like a Curtis Samuel or Kadarius Toney or Xavier Worthy or something like that. But he's bigger, hence the Cordero comps. He's even gotten Laviska Shenault comps that I've seen too. But he definitely moves at a different speed than Laviska. And he actually reminds me of Brandon Ayuk because I think Ayuk coming out of college was like the greatest after the catch player in college. And he was a solid route runner, but like that area needed to be refined a little bit more. And he certainly wasn't ready to beat press man coverage in the NFL from day one. But then he developed into one of the best route runners and overall best receivers in the NFL. And so I don't think that Savion Williams is going to like leap up into the first round or anything, but I think that he's just one like middle round receiver prospect that has a high ceiling to keep an eye on. And I think that receiver is another position, like we were just saying about running backs and tight ends in the edge group, that they might not necessarily need to address it with the 5th overall pick, even though I know that a lot of people are advocating for Ted McMillan at 5. But I think it is a position that they should address later on. And so that'll make the draft season definitely interesting because they have so many needs like in depth throughout the roster that obviously every single round is going to be important. But to kind of flip it on its head, are there any positions that like you think the Jaguars should not be interested in? Like, are there any positions or guys that you're just straight up not going to be watching at the combine and throughout draft season?
Well, I mean, certainly there are two guys that jump out, and the reason I bring these two guys up, and they would be guys you would take at number 5, is I've had a lot of draft guys on my show, and some guys are very high on these two, and some guys are not even lukewarm on these two. You mentioned McMillan out of Arizona. I've had guys all over the board with him. I know people that love him, and I know people that don't think he's a first-round pick, which is wild that there's such a differing of opinion in the scouting community on McMillan. And the other is Will Johnson. And Will Johnson, the corner from Michigan, people like Will Johnson, but I've had enough people tell me there are red flags with injury concerns there. And when you're picking in the top 5, man, that's something you don't want is a red flag with injury concerns. That would not be a good thing. So from an injury standpoint, Will Johnson is somebody that I don't necessarily know if I'd like the Jaguars to take. And then McMillan is just so puzzling to me because, again, some guys really like him. Some guys do not think he's a first rounder.
Yeah, I think Will Johnson might be like have the most to gain or lose from the NFL Combine more than any other player because there's both injury question marks, but then there's also speed question marks. And I think that is kind of related to his injuries. But there is a question out there of like, oh, can he actually match perimeter wide receivers step for step down the field? And so his 40 time, but then also medicals get checked at the NFL Combine. So his 40 and his medicals are going to be really important for his stock. So that's definitely a good one to keep an eye on. Do you happen to know like why people aren't interested or sold on Ted McMillan as a first round pick? Because I'm not necessarily sold on him as a top 5 pick, but I certainly think he's a first round guy.
I've had people use the Laquan Treadwell comparison with him. Laquan Treadwell, kind of the same measurables, same things he did at Ole Miss that McMillan was doing at Arizona. 6'3.5", 6'4", good size, but it just didn't pan out. Some people think that McMillan could be Mike Evans, right? I've had that comparison. I've had Drake London, which would also be very good. And then I've had Laquan Treadwell, of course, a former Jaguar, Laquan Treadwell. So you see the differing. Some Mike Evans, Laquan Treadwell, I mean, that's a gigantic gap as to where McMillan's going to fall. And you want that big a gap on a guy that you're going to take at number 5 overall. And I don't know how we're going to see this at the Combine, but I've heard this analogy too with Mason Graham. I'm curious if you have. I keep hearing the term violent hands. And I'm not exactly sure what that means. I mean, violent hands, but I want to see the violent hands because I've had like 3 guys tell me he's got the most violent hands since Jeffrey Simmons at the interior D-line position in the draft. So I want to see what violent hands look like at the Combine.
Yeah, I would assume that means just strong hands, as in being able to kind of fight through blocks and fight through the arms of opposing blockers. Yeah, it is always funny hearing like the coaching, or really more so the scouting cliches, always pop up at this time of year. One guy that I'm a little bit cold on personally is Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State. I think that he's certainly like a first round caliber prospect, but to me, I think Colston Loveland is from Michigan is as good, if not better, as a prospect. And then Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green set like almost every single tight end FBS record for a single season that you could think of last season. I think he became like the first FBS tight end ever to lead the country in both receptions and receiving yards. So there's 2 really good options after Tyler Warren. And then the overall tight end class is really deep. And so I think that Tyler Warren is, again, a good prospect and arguably the best tight end prospect in the class. But I think that because the position is so deep this year, then that kind of lowers his own value. And then I also have seen like people comparing him to like Gronk as like a high ceiling comp, and that's just ludicrous to me. And partly because like Gronk like gets the Mahomes or the Brady treatment, where if you comp any player to him, then like I'm just not going to take you seriously. But also, I like don't see the comp at all. Like Gronk was just an offensive lineman that could break every single tackle and catch balls up the seam and score 14 touchdowns a year. And Tyler Warren, I think he's a really good tight end, but I don't think is really like a true difference maker. He's fifth-year senior too, pretty old relative to a lot of other guys in his class, especially at the position. So I don't think the Jaguars will be in the position really to take Tyler Warren in terms of where they are picking in the draft and in terms of their current tight end room, especially if they keep Evan Ingram. But yeah, that's just one of the few takes that I have leading into NFL Combine Week. Hacker, is there anything else on your mind leading into next week for Indianapolis and Combine Week?
Well, you mentioned the tight end room. I do think it'll be interesting because I think the Jaguars at some point will draft a tight end because Luke Farrell's a free agent. Josiah DeGuara is a free agent. Who knows if they're going to bring either one of those guys back? And Evan Ingram's over the age of 30. So even though I like Ingram, I believe he'll be back. I like Brenton Strange, obviously. I've heard, like you had, I've had people tell me this is one of the best tight end classes ever, and maybe one of the most deepest tight end classes ever. And I think Jacksonville at some point, not high, but maybe one of those picks in round 4, the round 5 selection, somewhere in that ballpark, will probably invest in the tight end room, assuming DeGuara and Luke Farrell have played their last games in Jacksonville.
Absolutely. All right, that'll do it for this episode. Keep it short and sweet as we head into the weekend. Hope everyone has a good one. Hacker, thanks as always for joining. We'll see you back here next Friday, and I'll see everyone else back here on Monday at 9:04 a.m. I'll have a full 7-round Jaguars mock draft ready to talk about, and we'll also be ready to talk about whoever the next Jaguars general manager is, because, again, we are thinking that the news will come out either late tonight or early tomorrow morning. So, till next time, thanks again, Hacker. Thanks again, everyone. Take care.